Okay, so let's be real for a sec. We've all messed up at work at some point.
Right. Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like, it doesn't matter if it's missing a deadline or accidentally hitting reply all on an email you really shouldn't have.
Oh, been there.
We'll have those moments where you just want to, like, disappear.
Definitely.
Well, in this deep dive, we're going to get into this podcast transcript all about how to handle those tough conversations at work when, well, things go wrong.
Absolutely. Those situations, I mean, they happen to everybody. And I think what makes this transcript so interesting is it's not just giving a bunch of tips. It actually uses like a realistic dialogue as an example.
Right.
You know, the way we talk to each other when things get messed up, it can make or break professional relationships. So let's dive in and see what we can learn.
All right, so the situation in this WorkWise podcast, it's a manager who has to confront an employee about a missed deadline.
Oh,
The report was due yesterday, and it's nowhere to be found.
oh boy.
I'm already stressing just thinking about it.
Yeah, it's definitely a tense situation. But one thing that's interesting is how the employee responds.
Okay.
They don't try to make excuses or shift the blame. Instead, they just own it right off the bat. They say, I'm so sorry, I miscalculated the timeline.
Yeah, that's a good start, for sure. But later on, they also say, I should have double-checked my schedule. I underestimated the time needed. It seems like a pretty subtle difference. But is there something more to it, like strategically?
Absolutely. Think about it this way. When you say I miscalculated versus I didn't have enough time, there's a difference. I miscalculated kind of suggests there was a problem in their process, something that they can look at and improve. But the other one, it kind of sounds more like a personal shortcoming. So by using language that focuses on a process that can be fixed, they come across as way more analytical and, solution-oriented.
So they're not just taking responsibility, but they're also kind of subtly reassuring the manager that they're already thinking about how to stop this from happening again.
Exactly. It's a smart way to frame the whole conversation. It shows they're willing to learn from this mistake.
The manager in this podcast, they talk a lot about this idea of proactive communication. So what does that actually look like beyond just apologizing after something's already gone wrong?
It's basically about keeping your manager in the loop before things blow up into a crisis. So let's say you're working on a project and you hit a snag that might push back the deadline.
Oh.
Instead of just hoping you can magically catch up later, proactive communication means you tell them about the issue early on.
Right.
You clearly explain the situation, and you offer up potential solutions.
Okay.
Maybe you need to adjust the timeline or get a little extra support. The whole point is to be open and give your manager a chance to help you figure things out.
That makes sense. It shows you're on top of things and thinking ahead, not just trying to hide problems or deal with them on your own.
Exactly. And honestly, it can often prevent a small issue from becoming a total disaster.
One thing that really stood out to me in this dialogue was the tone. Even though it's a stressful situation, both the manager and the employee stay really calm and respectful. It feels very deliberate.
It totally is. The way they're talking to each other plays a big part in making sure things don't escalate. Like when the manager talks about needing better communication, the employee simply says, "You're right."
Yeah.
It's such a simple phrase, but it shows they're really taking that feedback on board and not getting all defensive.
Like they acknowledge the manager's authority, but without sounding like totally defeated.
Exactly. And on the manager's side, notice how they avoid accusing the employee. Instead of saying something like, "You messed up again," they ask a question. This isn't the first time this has happened. What happened?
Mm-hmm.
It's less about assigning blame and more about figuring out the situation together and working toward a solution as a team.
So it's all about creating a space for honest and open conversation where everyone feels heard and respected, even when someone's made a mistake. This is all great advice. But how can our listener actually use these ideas in their own work life?
That's the big question, right? I mean, every workplace is different, and the kinds of mistakes people make, it totally depends on their role and the industry.
True.
But what's interesting is that the basic communication principles, they often stay the same. It's about taking responsibility, framing the issue in a positive way, and focusing on solutions rather than blaming each other.
Let's go beyond this scenario for a minute and think about common mistakes people make in their own fields. Maybe it's forgetting to CC a key person on an email or misunderstanding instructions on a big project.
Right. Think about your own experiences. What are some mistakes you've seen people make?
Yeah.
Or, mistakes you've made yourself?
Oh, definitely.
But the point is to not just ignore them, but to actually think about what happened. Where did the communication break down? How could it have been avoided?
And even more importantly, how can you use what we're talking about today from this podcast transcript in those real-life situations?
Exactly. Because even though everyone makes mistakes, not everyone handles them well. And that's where the real growth happens.
And that's what we're going to keep exploring as we dive deeper into this.
It's interesting you mentioned different industries because, how we deal with mistakes can be totally different depending on the context. Like in a high pressure field, something like surgery,
Oh, yeah,
there's not much room for error there.
true. The stakes are super high. But even in those fields, communication is still key, right?
Oh, absolutely. Actually, it's even more important in those situations. Think about it.
Mhm.
A surgeon makes a mistake during an operation. They can't just sweep it under the rug or hope no one notices.
Right.
They have to tell the rest of the team immediately so they can work together to fix it.
That makes a lot of sense. So even though the consequences might be more serious in some fields, those principles of open and honest communication still apply.
Exactly. It's all about owning up to it, explaining what happened, and outlining the steps to correct it.
Okay, so let's switch gears for a minute and think about creative industries, something like design or advertising. Mistakes there might not be life or death, but they can still hurt a company's reputation or, their bottom line.
For sure. And in those fields, it's often about managing expectations and keeping those client relationships strong. So imagine you're a designer and you present a logo concept and the client just hates it.
Oof. Yeah, I can feel that cringe.
It's a tough spot, but it's how you handle it that makes all the difference. Instead of getting defensive or trying to make the client like your design, you have to listen to their feedback, understand their concerns, and be ready to go back to the drawing board.
So it's about being flexible and showing that you're willing to collaborate to get the best result, even if it means admitting your first idea wasn't the one.
Exactly. And that takes a certain amount of humility and emotional intelligence, which are important everywhere, but especially in creative fields where you're always dealing with subjective feedback.
Sounds like no matter what industry you're in, a big part of handling mistakes well isn't just what you say, but how you say it.
You're totally right. We talked about the actual words used in that WorkWise podcast, but we can't forget about nonverbal stuff. Things like body language, tone of voice, even eye contact all play a huge role in how our message comes across.
So true. Like, you can apologize for a mistake, but if you're all slumped over, avoiding eye contact, mumbling, it's not going to seem very sincere.
Nope, not at all. Your body language can either back up your words or totally contradict them. Think about that employee from the WorkWise podcast. We can't see them, obviously, but we can picture them sitting up straight, making eye contact with the manager, speaking in a clear and steady voice.
Instead of fidgeting, looking at the floor and sounding all defensive, those nonverbal cues would totally change how their apology is perceived.
100%. It's about projecting confidence and a willingness to take responsibility, even if inside you're feeling nervous or embarrassed.
It's almost like acting, in a way. You have to really control your body language and tone to get your message across the right way.
Yeah, you could say that. It's about being aware of how you're presenting yourself, even when things are tough.
Okay, so we talked about specific industries and this whole idea of nonverbal communication.
Mm-hmm.
But let's zoom out for a sec and look at the bigger picture. How does handling mistakes well affect our careers in the long run?
That's a great question. It's easy to see mistakes as just bad, but they can actually be really valuable learning experiences.
I like that. So you're saying messing up doesn't have to be a career killer.
Not at all. In fact, if you handle it well, it can actually make you more credible and strengthen your relationships at work.
Mhm.
Think about it. Everyone makes mistakes. It's just going to happen. What sets people apart is how they react to those mistakes.
So it's not about being perfect. It's about being accountable and showing you want to learn and grow.
Exactly. And that's something employers value. They want people on their team who can admit when they're wrong, take ownership, and find solutions.
It's like showing you're not afraid to fail because you know how to recover and learn from those experiences.
Yeah, great way to put it. Mistakes can be incredibly valuable, both for you personally and for the whole company.
They can highlight things that need to be improved, like processes or communication.
Right. And they can help create a culture of transparency and continuous improvement, which is so important for any successful company.
But of course, that only works if those mistakes are talked about openly and constructively.
Mm-hmm.
Like brushing them under the rug or blaming other people is just going to create a toxic environment where people are too scared to take risks or speak up.
And that's why communication is so crucial. It's the bridge that connects understanding, helps people grow, and builds those stronger relationships.
It's about being proactive, respectful, and willing to learn from everything, good or bad.
That's what really makes a successful professional.
Now, before we wrap up this deep dive, let's think about things from the manager's side for a second. What advice would you give to someone who has to address an employee's mistake?
I think it's important to remember that as a manager, your job isn't to punish mistakes, but to help your team learn and grow.
So instead of getting mad or being super critical, try to be empathetic and understanding.
Exactly. Remember, everyone makes mistakes, even the most experienced people. Your job is to make it safe for them to admit their errors and learn from them.
So that means asking questions to figure out why the mistake happened, working together to find solutions to stop it from happening again, and setting clear expectations and offering support so your team can succeed.
Right, because ultimately, a manager's success depends on the success of their team. And that success relies on open communication and everyone working together to grow.
So whether you're the one who made the mistake or the one dealing with it, remember, communication is key.
It's about having those tough conversations, being honest with yourself and others, and making space for learning and growth.
Now, to wrap up our deep dive into this WorkWise podcast transcript, let's leave our listeners with a final question to think about. What if, instead of being terrified of making mistakes at work, we, flip the script and actually embrace them?
Oh, wow.
What if we saw them as chances to get better at communicating and building stronger connections with our coworkers?
That's a really cool idea. Imagine a workplace where messing up wasn't a huge deal, but like a chance to learn and grow.
Exactly. A place where everyone feels okay with admitting they messed up because they know they'll get help and support, not just blamed.
That kind of sets the stage for open communication, which is so important for any team. When people aren't afraid to talk about their mistakes, everyone can learn from them and avoid making the same ones again.
It's like everyone's in it together. Everyone's helping each other out. That sounds way more productive and less stressful than a place where everyone's walking on eggshells, scared to mess up.
Totally. That kind of fear just kills creativity and stops people from trying new things. No one wants to take risks if they're worried about getting in trouble.
And that's where real growth happens, right? When we push ourselves and maybe make some mistakes along the way, that's when we learn the most.
You got it. And those lessons not only make us better at our jobs, but they help us become more resilient and adaptable, which is super important in today's world.
So instead of seeing mistakes as failures, what if we looked at them as stepping stones to success?
That's a great way to think about it. It's about realizing that mistakes are just part of learning. And by embracing them, we can create a work culture that's all about growth, innovation, and working together.
That's something worth working towards. So to everyone listening, let's try to change how we think about mistakes at work.
Let's promise to be open and honest, even when it's hard.
And let's create workplaces where everyone feels safe to admit their mistakes and learn from them without feeling judged or punished.
Because in the end, that's how we all succeed, both individually and as a team.
This has been a really interesting deep dive into handling mistakes at work. Hopefully it's given you some useful strategies and a new way of thinking about those slip-ups that happen to all of us.
Remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about taking responsibility, communicating openly, and always trying to improve.
And until next time, keep on diving deep.
If you found this conversation helpful or relatable, don't forget to hit the like button and share it with others who might benefit from it.